This video is sponsored by MPB. I've been using the Sony RX1Riii for a little while now, and I keep coming back to this phrase, which is, there aren't any bad cameras anymore, but maybe there are still bad value cameras. And that's what I'd like to explore in this video. The Sony RX line is a fan favourite for everyday carry enthusiasts, and the community's been screaming out for an updated version for 10 years now. The RX1R2 came out in 2015. And if you don't know about the line, it's tiny, it's full frame, and it has a fixed 35mm f2 lens. And I really can't emphasise just how tiny it is, particularly given that it's full frame. But first things first, I've got to say, this tiny camera is £4,000 or 5,000 American dollars. So everything that I talk about in this video has to be seen through the frame of that, because holy crap. And I'm pretty sure that makes it the most expensive camera that I've used personally this year. Even a Lumix S1R2 with a good stock lens would be significantly cheaper than this. And I know it's a completely apples to oranges comparison because they're for very different target audiences, but yeah, this is not a cheap boy. And comparing this to the Mark II, which is 10 years old now, there have been some really good improvements, some things that are bewilderingly removed, and some things that equally bewilderingly have just stayed the same. None of the RX line, all the way back to 2012, has ever been weather sealed. And I think given its target audience and its price, that's a really big oversight. And every single one of them, all the way back to 2012, have the same lens, the exact same lens. 35mm f2 with absolutely no optical stabilization. Yes, in 2025, you're paying $5,000 for a 2012 lens that hasn't had any tweaks at all made to it. No optical stabilization is an absolute killer because the body has no stabilization either. And when you pair this completely unstabilized camera with a 60 megapixel full frame sensor, in the real world that means even 50th of a second becomes unusable, which is really frustrating to me. I'm completely spoiled because my everyday carry is usually the OM System OM3, which can do 6 seconds handheld without breaking a sweat.
And it's not a stabilised lens.
Who would need more than 6 seconds? Nobody would need more than 6 seconds, that's just stupid. Even the Canon PowerShot V1, which I use quite a lot as well, has an optically stabilised lens, and you can get really nice long exposures with that. It's just something that I do quite regularly because I'm spoiled with all of my stabilisation choices, and taking that away has been quite frustrating to me. Even some shots at a good shutter speed, like 300ths of a second, if I'm just walking around, I'm quite used to being able to just snap and not stop. Whereas with this Sony, because it's not stabilised at all, you do have to stop and take the photo. So good things about this lens is it's pretty small, and it does have a leaf shutter built in, so there is a mechanical shutter with this camera, which is wonderful. Less good stuff, I've noticed the edges are quite soft and smudgy. The centre is really sharp, but the edges are a little bit for the price. Everything is for the price. And I've also noticed quite a lot of chromatic aberration, particularly purple fringing. And there's even a setting in the camera to mitigate this, which I've turned on, and I'm still getting quite a lot of it, which is a little bit frustrating. Say it with me, for the price. I actually think the lack of IBIS in this camera, along with some other things, makes things like the Lumix S9 and the Fujifilm X100VI seem very good value for money. One upgrade, which I think is a downgrade, is on the Mark II you had this beautiful pop-up EVF, quite reminiscent of an RX100 in the Sony line. And because you had a little bit of extra room to play with, you also had a tilting screen on that model as well. But on the new one, there's no tilting screen and the EVF is fixed in place. So if you do love the look of the Mark III, or perhaps the Mark II, you should definitely check out the sponsor of today's video, MPB. MPB are the world's largest platform for buying, selling and trading all of your camera equipment. And it's really simple to do. You can just put in your model number and condition, they'll give you an instant quote, you don't need to speak to anyone, and then off it goes to MPB to get checked over. A couple of days later, you'll get the money in your bank. I've been, for my sins, selling bits and bobs on an auction site recently, just camera bags and stuff that MPB wouldn't take. And I swear, within 3 hours, I got 3 scammers in my inbox. And I'm just like, the stress of selling things privately is just so annoying. And I haven't done it in a long while because I only ever use MPB, and yeah, I'm not a fan. So if you'd like to sell or buy or trade with absolutely no stress with a wonderful, reputable, reliable company, then check out MPB's links below. I have UK, EU and US, so click away and see what they can do for you. Let's get back to the nerdiness. I know this isn't probably the first use case that comes to mind for this camera, but I just happened to have it delivered on the day that I was doing gig photography, so I thought, sod it, let's take it out and put it through a really good stress test. And one thing that I really missed when I was taking these gig photos with the Sony is not having a tiltable screen, because when you're in sort of the pit in front of the stage, a lot of the times you are either sort of having your camera over your head or you're angling it up to get the talent, and that was made quite challenging with the Sony versus the 2 Lumix cameras which I had with me at the time. But in terms of image quality, it was bloody great. I think the images at the gig are vibrant, really nice sense of depth to them, the focus was superb. There was a couple of niggles with just writing to the card, because it's a 60 megapixel sensor and I was shooting RAW plus JPEG because I wanted to see what the JPEGs look like. I was finding that even after just a couple of shots, and I did have a fast SD card, after a couple of shots, like, the camera was locking up and writing to card, which is quite annoying. I think given the price, you could have put a bigger buffer in this thing, man. I know like burst modes and things are probably not the main use case for it, but this was single shot and it was locking up steadily throughout the day. The main 3 upgrades which I love from the 2 to the 3 are the new Sony menus, which make me cry significantly less. They're still not my favourite in the world, but they're a lot more intuitive than they were. 2, the biggest is probably the touch screen, because as reliable as the autofocus is, sometimes I just like to be able to poke and give it a bit of direction. And then the 3rd thing is you go from a 40 odd megapixel sensor to a 60 megapixel sensor, so a huge resolution bump. As I've mentioned, that has the cons because the file sizes are huge and the buffer can only keep so many of them before it stops and has a cup of tea. But playing with these in Lightroom is so cool. The C1 button at the front of the 3rd generation of this camera gives you like a fake punch in. So you have 35 to begin with, it goes to 50 and then 70, and it does it instantly so you can frame things in camera as though you've changed the lens. And what I really like in the Sony is the crop information stays in Lightroom, so you can see it how you shot it, but then when you press the crop tool you can see just how much you've cropped in. And look at some of these. Let's have a pixel peep, because I feel like I am being a bit critical about this camera because it's so bloody expensive, but at the end of the day the image quality is very, very nice. Particularly when I was harassing this squirrel in the rain, I got relatively close, but 35mm is never going to be the one for wildlife, is it? So having the 60 megapixels to just really punch in, I thought it was superb. This little story might get a kick out of my regular audience, and it's well worth mentioning. The EVF did not spark too much joy with me. It's a very expensive premium camera. I was expecting it to be stunning, and it just did the job. It was all right. And so I looked at the spec, and it's 2.36 million dot EVF, and that number rang a little bell in my brain, and I was like, oh wow. In the Micro Four Thirds community, the OM System OM3 has the same viewfinder as this very expensive Sony, and in the Micro Four Thirds community, when the OM3 came out, everyone was kicking off because that has the same viewfinder as the relatively old OM5, which is a very old-ish budget camera, really, comparatively to the Sony. And make of that what you will, but if this spec was enough to piss off the Micro Four Thirds community, I don't think this quality of EVF should be in such an expensive camera. Something I love is the customizable JPEGs in the Sony. There are some recent additions in the Mark III versus the older ones which don't, and I love the Film 3 look, which is what these JPEGs are, and I think they look very pleasing straight out of camera. If you were looking for an everyday carry camera where you could take the JPEGs and put them straight online, this would do the job. It's very pleasing. They're nowhere near as versatile as Fujifilm Recipes or Lumix Real-Time LUT, but seeing other companies do this is really, really a positive thing, because I do think it's a great feature to have. So going back to what I said at the very beginning of this video, this image quality is great. objectively, everyone could look at these images and go, do you know what, that's a damn good rendered image. But is that significantly better than an APS-C image? Or is that significantly better than a Micro Four Thirds image? Is this significantly better than a full frame camera from 10 years ago? Probably not. We're talking this much difference and this much price at this point, because all cameras are good. So we're at this strange sort of place in the camera world now where you can't really be like, that's a $5,000 image, because it's not. It might be that the experience that you get as a whole with this camera is worth $5,000 to someone, which I'll talk about in a bit. But in terms of raw image quality, we've sort of hit a ceiling where everything is pretty good. So some real world experiences. I don't think this camera feels the safest to hold. I think there's a little bit of a grip going on, but it still feels quite like you need to use two hands some of the time with this camera. You can use it one-handed, but it feels like you could drop it at any bloody moment. What is interesting to me is, yes, it is small, but because the lens is still chunky, it's not a pocketable camera. You can't put this in a pocket. And to compare that to my usual walkabout camera for video, the Canon PowerShot V1, which is a very similar size, can fit in my pocket because the lens retracts, and the grip on that is super sturdy and feels really good in the hand. So I think if the lens is going to protrude a bit anyway, you may as well have a little bit more of a blooming grip so it feels a bit more secure. But thankfully, Sony have made these super affordable and sane accessories to go with this camera. So if you've just got a spare 300 quid for something that you could buy on Etsy for £2, they've got you covered. You could add the thumb grip. I was like, is there a decimal point there? No. You is not like a Sony. You is trying to be like her, but you is not. To make the EVF more comfortable, you have this big accessory that you can whack on the EVF at the back. At that point, the camera becomes very, very large in terms of like the depth. So you may as well just get like a normal camera and change the lenses. So what about some potential alternatives? I think the Fujifilm X100VI really does shine comparatively. The Fujifilm has IBIS, the Fujifilm has built-in ND filters, the Fujifilm has better video quality, it has a much better EVF and an articulating screen, and it's more comfortable to hold, and it's a bit prettier, and it's a third of the price, and the JPEGs are better. And if you're looking in the Sony mirrorless land, the Sony A7CR is a good comparison. The spec is very similar, it's a bit bigger, and you do have interchangeable lenses. So I think in terms of spec, that's better value for money, but I don't think it kind of ticks the everyday carry box that we're talking about for this particular camera. I do see what people mean with that comparison, but I don't think it quite fits. But if you were looking just for spec, then you could buy that camera and a plethora of lenses for much cheaper than the RX1Riii. I mean, when you say it out loud, this camera sounds insane. It sounds like an April Fool's joke. $5,000 for no weather sealing, no IBIS, no optical stabilization, no 4K 60 in a 2025 Sony camera. A dated EVF, no tilting screen, simple accessories that you can buy for the price of a house, and it's possibly prone to getting dust in now that I've pixel peeped the bokeh a little bit. Maybe I'm too much of a cheapskate to understand this camera. My own personal comparison, and yes, it is a Micro Four Thirds camera, and yes, I do imagine that a lot of Sony users are full frame snobs, which is fine, valid. If you want a full frame camera, spend your money, go wild. But I thought it was quite interesting to compare it to the OM3. The OM3 with a 35mm lens equivalent on it is very small. Neither of these are pocketable, so that's a moot point to begin with. The OM3 is fully weather sealed. It has incredible IBIS. It has 4K 60 video. You can change the lenses if you like. It has the same EVF quality as the Sony. It has a full metal body. It has a flippy screen, and it's a quarter of the price. Now I know a lot of Sony users would spit on the OM3 and its tiny little sensor, and that's their loss, but if you want to stay full frame and you want to get something similar, why not look at the Leica Q3? If you can afford a $5,000 camera, you can probably afford a $6,000 camera, and for that extra cash you get way more. You get full weather sealing, you get 5-axis IBIS, you get the same 60 megapixel sensor, you get a fully articulating screen, a much higher 5 million resolution EVF. That's what the Sony should have had, let's be honest. And a much faster f1.7 fixed lens. So the Sony RX1R3, which is very hard to say, has this bewildering, pretty unique quality where it makes cameras significantly cheaper than it seem like great value, and cameras more expensive than it seem like great value. There's not many cameras I can think of that can pull that off. So is it all bad? Absolutely not. I had a great old time with this camera. In my opinion, I think there are 3 categories of camera, now that there are no bad cameras, just bad value cameras. The first category is spec. These are your workhorses, like your Lumix S1 IIs, for example, where you get the most amount of modern technology and spec for the money. It's a very seamless, sensible, easy thing to understand. Is it the most fun to use? Probably not. Is it massive? Probably, but it's a tool that gets the job done. Category 1. Category 2 is experience cameras, which is the exact opposite end of that spectrum. So I would put like the Fujifilm X-Half in this category, and I would put Instax cameras in this category, those stupid little Kodak charm cameras, maybe the camp cameras, for example, and also premium cameras in the experience category as well. Like for instance, the manual focus only Leica cameras, or monochrome cameras that are very niche, and some may say limiting, but you do get a really interesting and unique experience from them. And the RX1R3. You objectively do not get anywhere near the spec that you should be getting for the price, but what you do get is a feeling. You get an experience. The value of that experience is down to the individual. If someone gets joy from this product and gets the experience that they're looking for, then it's a win. It's why fast cars exist. People like to throw a shed load of money at stuff for a feeling. Now, I think I'm too much of a cheapskate most of the time for that sort of category. I will get a charming camera, I've got tons of them, if it's cheap. You'd really have to convince me to get an expensive camera that doesn't do stuff, which is why I think my category of cameras of choice is category 3. Which is a mixture of the two. You have enough spec that the camera is good value for money, but it's also fun. So in this category, I'd put the OM System OM3. I would put the Lumix S9. I would put the Fujifilm X100 I think these categories are great because you can get professional results from it, but it's also a lot of fun to use. Call me a cheapskate, that's fine. I just need to know that I'm getting enough stuff for my money and not just a fancy experience. So in my opinion, the Sony RX1R3 is an experience camera. And that means a lot of people are going to criticize it because the spec isn't really there. But people on the other side of that will get the experience from it and really enjoy it. I think it's fair to say that this camera isn't for everyone and it's not for me, but it doesn't mean that it's not for many people. So would I recommend the Sony RX1R Mark II as an alternative? I think in terms of price, it's certainly less eye-watering, but I also think it's even more limiting because there's no touchscreen, the older menus, a smaller sensor, megapixel size-wise. It is an older camera now, it's a 10-year-old camera, so I don't know, you could probably still pick up a Fujifilm or a Lumix S9 or a Sigma BF, I suppose that's another experience camera, for about the same price as the RX1R Mark II. Oh my god, that model number is doing my head in. So for the Mark II, it's still alright value for money, but it's still quite expensive for what you get. So I'm not sure I would even recommend going down the line unless this form factor and full frameness is what you want. In which case, go wild, because there's really not many full frame cameras that are this small. But in terms of spec and value, I still think there are better alternatives elsewhere. But as always, this is just one gal's opinion, and I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Feel free to call me a cheapskate, it's totally fine.